This is Fish of Minnesota for Natural Resources class. So, some facts about our state. There's 149 different species of fish. 135 of them are considered native. That leaves 14 as introduced species. And we'll answer these as we go. So it's what is the largest fish in Minnesota and what's the smallest fish? And you might be surprised. The largest may not be so surprising, but the smallest might be. Some objectives or learning targets would be identify different fins and appendages of fish and recognize the different fish species. So if you look at appendages and fins, some of this may not be new to you, some might be, and that's okay. So when you kind of start, we'll kind of start and go up and around. So you have the nostril here, and this is kind of a generic fish. We're trying to show you all the parts. Obviously you have the eyeball, and then you go for this little lateral line. This is really hard to see on some fish species. It's little tiny pores along the edge here. It's actually used for sensory. This piece is a dorsal fin. Some of our fish species are going to have hard rays in the front, like if you look at like a sunfish, they'll have soft rays in the back, but they'll have one dorsal fin. Adipose fin, this little piece right here is just a little fleshy, almost kind of like a pimple that you'll see on the Salmonidae family, which would be salmons. And then this is the caudal fin or tail fin, which is the one at the back. It's usually used for propulsion moving forward. The fin at the back here is called the anal fin. This is the pelvic fin, and here's the pectoral fin. So just remember in that order, you have pectoral, pelvic, and then anal fin. And the back, the caudal fin. This piece here is called the operculum. That's the fancy word for the gill cover. So that is the parts. Some of the terms, you have adipose, it's behind the main dorsal fin in trout, catfishes, and other bony fishes. Lateral line, already told you, is the sensory structure. Operculum, the gill cover. Barbels, which we didn't have on our fish, well, we kind of do. They're little ones on this fish image, but you'll see that in the catfish family. They're little whisker-like feelers that extend from the head of certain fish. So this kind of goes into the types. You have lampreys. Lampreys, the image is on the next slide, but you have sea silver, chestnut, and American brook. They are called anadromous. That means they live in lakes or oceans and make annual migrations to tributary streams to spawn. So they live in saltwater, spawn in freshwater is what you should get out of that. They are considered an aquatic invasive species. That is a big issue that you'll find out more about as we move forward. This is what a lamprey looks like. They're kind of like a big leech. What they'll typically do is attach to the side of a fish and suck all the nutrients out of it and kill it slowly. Sturgeons. Sturgeons are a super slow growing fish. They're considered very primitive. There are two types in our state. We have lake and shovelnose. They're bony plates on the head and the body, and they're very sensitive to pollution. The biggest one, and this is actually the biggest fish in Minnesota, is the lake sturgeon. They can exceed 200 pounds. If you've never had the chance to catch them, it's a really cool opportunity to do, and it's really fun. This is an example of the shovelnose. They weigh on average about 5 pounds, and both type are actually sought after for their caviar. That's the fish eggs. They sell them as a delicacy. They're very expensive. This is a paddlefish. They may look really weird to us. You can get a permit to fish for them, but you have to be very careful. They are illegal to take. They can be up to 50 pounds. They obviously have that very distinctive paddle-like snout, and they eat plankton. Gars are kind of cool. There's short nose and long nose. Last time I was at Cabela's, they still had them there in East Grand Forks. They come up to the surface to gulp for air, and they're carnivorous. If you look on their jaw, they have a lot of little jagged teeth on that small snout. This is the bowfin. The bowfin have kind of like a ribbon-like dorsal fin, and if you notice, they have a very large black spot on the tail. They weigh up to about 10 pounds. This is the mooneye family. So here's the hard part. These are the families up here in the listing. The goldeye and the mooneye fit in those families. They're found in very large lakes. They like the colder water, and they aren't really good to eat. The meat is super flaky and it doesn't have any flavor. Then we get into the herrings. You have the alewife and the gizzard shad. They're silver in color. On the next slide, you'll see a picture of the alewife. They have a purple spot behind its head, and they often become overabundant. They can lay several eggs at one time. That's part of the big issue. So here's that purple spot on the alewife. And if you notice, it says here for size reference, they're about 5 to 6 inches in length. Then we have freshwater eels. Freshwater eels are catadromous. They hatch in the sea and migrate to freshwater. So it's the opposite of anadromous, if you didn't catch that. And this is a picture of the American eel. The pikes. This is a really fun family to go fishing for. They tend to fight. They are also one of the easiest to catch. They're carnivores. The Minnesota hook and line record is actually 45 pounds, 12 ounces. And in the pike family, you have, it's actually Isosidae, the Latin term for it. You have the pike and the muskellunge. So if you notice, it kind of helps to look at the bars on the northern pike. They run horizontally. The other piece, if they're really young, you might have to look at the underside of the jaw. They have a different number of pores on muskies versus northern pikes. So this is a muskie. They actually, they're known for their muskie rampage too. There's a book called Fishes of Minnesota. If you ever get the chance to read it, it kind of goes on to some stories about it. But supposedly in the summer when it gets really hot out, it drives muskies crazy. And they will bite nonstop. So it's kind of cool when it's really hot to go fishing for muskies. The largest hook and line record in our state is 69 pounds, 15 ounces. The other piece that I left off here too, there's actually a hybrid of northerns and muskies. It's called a tiger muskie too, that are pretty unique to see. The mud minnows. The interesting part for the name, they're not actually minnows. They do burrow in mud, and they can actually survive periods of dryness or drought, because they'll burrow themselves in the mud and have enough moisture there to get through that period before water returns. Part of the way to identify them, they have this distinct bar in front of their tail fin, also known as the caudal fin. It's actually easier to see on this one here. The salmons, the Salmonidae, they actually have that adipose fin, that little fleshy piece right in front of the tail fin. They like cold water. There are actually some programs that I know schools have raised. They've raised some trout and salmons, and they have cold water tanks to do that in. If you get the chance to go to a fishery, a lot of times you can see those different opportunities too. So this family does include the brook trout, lake trout, rainbow trout, and brown trout. So here's an example of some brook trout. There's a lake trout. Lake trout tend to be quite large, and this one it says average 15 to 34 inches, and this is how the adipose fin looks on this fish. There's a rainbow trout. They are 8 to 20 inches in inland waters, and then 20 to 34 inches in the Great Lakes. This is a brown trout. They are 8 to 20 inches in inland waters, 20 to 32 in the Great Lakes. And then there's the smelts. If you've ever been to a smelt fry, this is the little bugger that you're actually eating. They are also anadromous. They're introduced. So here's what we did. It was with good intentions, but it went bad. So we introduced the smelt as food for the lake trout. The hard part is they became competition for the young walleye. The lake trout and young walleye actually were competing with the smelt for food. The hard part that they've had to struggle managing is female can lay 12,000 to 50,000 eggs at one time, so they reproduce quite quickly. And honestly, that's too why if you hear about people doing smelting, when they're actually spawning, they will take trash cans and really just fill with smelt because there isn't a limit on them because of the issues with their overpopulation. The minnows. The minnows is not surprisingly the largest family in Minnesota. There are 41 native species of minnow, 3 are introduced. They don't have a long lifespan, not surprising. We use them for bait. You have goldfish, silver chub, golden shiner. So there's some images here too of those. The suckers, they are actually closely related to the minnows. They are toothless. These are ones if you're trying to introduce kids to the concept of fishing. If you can buy them as bait and have kids handle them just to get used to that idea. They can't really hurt themselves. But they are closely related to minnows. We do use them as food for us. We also use them for animal feed and bait. For animal feed, there's actually a feed that is called fish meal. It's really just ground up fish. They can also use it for fish flakes if you're going to feed like goldfish or something. And then if you look to human consumption, sometimes people will actually smoke them. You have in the family of white sucker, carp suckers, shorthead red horse. Excuse me. For catfish, they're very distinctive. They have scaleless skin. They have barbels and the adipose fin. There are 9 species in Minnesota. We do use them as food. And some of them that we have are the channel catfish, blue catfish, and bullhead. And if you ever caught one, you would definitely know because they're pretty unique looking. Pirate perch. Pirate perch do look a lot like a small sunfish. They have a length of only about 5 inches. They have a dark vertical band in front of their caudal fin. The really unfortunate piece for design of these fish, their vent, where they go to the bathroom out of, is actually located on the throat. And here's your image of a pirate perch. So you can see there's no vent here. It's actually up in this area. For sunfish, this is one of the most important game fish that we have in our state. They are predaceous fish, meaning they're a predator. They do find food by sight. So that's if you have different lures, they do like, the attraction of the sight, the colors, whatever it may be. Family includes largemouth and smallmouth bass, rock bass, bluegill, pumpkin seed, green sunfish, and black crappie. So here's your largemouth bass. Part of the way to identify them too, they tend to be larger fish, but also the jawline should go, like it should hinge at the point behind the eye, if not in line with it, and then smallmouth should be kind of in front of the eye. There's a bluegill, known for that big bluegill on it. Pumpkin seed, they should be a bright orange in color. And then you have a green sunfish, black crappie. Then you have the perches. So the interesting part is the walleye is actually in the same family with the perch. They're in the Percopsidae. This is the state fish of Minnesota right here, the walleye. We use them for food. They taste really good. Their family includes perch, walleye, and sauger. So there's your yellow perch. There's a walleye. And then there's the hard part. If you have walleye and sauger, usually your walleye is going to have that white tip here. Also, sauger tend to have those dark lines on the dorsal fins. So if you're not sure how to tell them apart, it helps to have those side-by-side images to compare. So that is your fish of Minnesota. But the thing that we forgot to mention is that the smallest fish in the state is actually in the minnow family. Not surprising, but it's called the least darter. So that's fish of Minnesota. Thank you for listening.